Welcome back, everyone, to the weekend. Election interference was at the heart of the New York criminal case against Donald Trump. In his closing arguments, prosecutor Joshua Steinglass says, quote, "This scheme cooked up by these men at this time could very well be what got President Trump elected. This was overt election fraud, an act in furtherance of the conspiracy to promote Mr. Trump's election by unlawful means. Put more simply, those crimes directly contributed to Trump being elected president." Joining us now is Katie Phang. She's an attorney and host of the Katie Phang Show right here on MSNBC. And also with us, the founder of Democracy Docket and partner of the Elias Law Group, Mark Elias. Welcome to you both.
I love that reminder, Katie, that you are, in fact, an attorney. You don't just play one on TV. There was a lot of critique about the fact that very often people in media would refer to this case as the hush money case. I would argue that that was in part to differentiate it from all of the other election interference.
Would you have to stop for a second to think about that, right?
Yes,
the fact that there's so many. No, we have to differentiate that.
But I want you to just frame for us why it mattered that ultimately Bragg decided to pursue this as a question of election interference.
Yeah, so I wrote a piece for MS Online about why it was, as a legal concept, a novel theory in terms of trying to do this, because the case in and of itself, the New York election law statute, is not really prosecuted that often here. The falsification of business records, Alvin Bragg himself has referred to those as the bread and butter white collar cases for the Manhattan DA's office. But to elevate it to the felony is kind of the more novel thing. So Bragg actually, it took courage to do this. Why? Because you not only have to make sure that you have the probable cause and that you're able to meet all the elements of the crime, but when you're a prosecutor, you really have to stop and take stock of whether or not a jury is going to care about this kind of case. Will a jury say to itself, oh, it's just a hush money payment, why are you trying to make it into another thing that it's not? And that's kind of been the theme and the banner that the GOP's been running with to defend Donald Trump. But it matters because, and I've been saying this, and it kind of crystallized a little bit better for me as I got deeper and deeper into this case. That 2015 Trump Tower meeting I've called the original sin. And the reason why I call it that is when Pecker, Trump, and Cohen conspired to do the catch and kill schemes. And the reason why it's the original sin is, but for that meeting where they agreed to kill those negative stories and to promote the negative ones about Trump's opponents, he may have never made it into the Oval Office. And everything that has kind of spun off from that meeting and the successful catch and kill has led to him claiming absolute immunity as a president, has led to him stealing classified documents, has led to him having January 6th. So if we think about all of the indictments that came after he became president, maybe, just maybe, if he had never made it there in the first place, he never would have had these cases. We would never have had a January 6th. I mean, there's all of this stuff that kind of came as a domino effect from that meeting. And Bragg made you care about that meeting. Bragg put it on a way and set the table for you to understand it had nothing to do with him having sex with other people. It was nothing about just those two people having sex, whoever it was, him and someone else. It was about him stealing this election from the American public. And that's why you care.
That's an interesting point, Mark, because I agree with that analysis at the end of the day, because the political climate at that time would not have tolerated that storyline, would not have tolerated any of that, which is what the Fear of the Access Hollywood tape did in conjunction with the Stormy Daniels affair. That political climate in the country would have said, oh, hell no, we're not going there. So for Trump, it was a matter of corroding that political climate, bringing the political climate to where he is, right? So it becomes more accepting of this bad behavior, which is why you see, I think, a lot of the fractures across the country, the hardness of those who are supporting a guy that 6, 7, 8, 10 years ago, there's no way, because culturally, politically, the country was in a very different place. And he has, in many respects, effectively moved it closer to his view of these things, where they're less important. It's more about him. He's the victim versus what it would have been otherwise. So I think Katie makes interesting points. I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think two things. The first is, I do want to put us all back in that time frame, as you point out, Michael. I was the general counsel to the Clinton campaign at the time. Donald Trump was reeling from the Access Hollywood tape. As you recall, one of the only times you've ever seen Donald Trump have to show contrition was after that Access Hollywood tape, because it was so serious. And to me, the most the key moment of the trial politically for me was actually Hope Hicks's testimony, where she sort of acknowledges, or not sort of, she acknowledges that this would have been the end of the campaign. Had this come out, this would have been the end of their campaign. And, you know, I tweeted shortly after the verdict that for those of us who worked for Hillary Clinton or were supporters of her, you know, this proved something we always suspected, that but for his criminal acts, he wouldn't have beaten her that election. And so I want to give her that due. We talk a lot about he wouldn't have been president, but who would have been president would have been Hillary Clinton.
Well, Mark,
Hillary Clinton would have appointed 2 justices to the U.S. Supreme Court. Hillary Clinton would have been in charge of healthcare policy and foreign policy, and our country would look very different today, but for the crimes that he engaged in to win that election. And so I think that's important. The other thing you say, Michael, that I do think is worth pointing out is that it also hardened the Republican Party into believing that criminal acts were part of the political process. And so, you know, we now see a Republican Party that is bragging how much money it raises off of felony convictions, and it has transformed the Republican Party into a party led by a crime boss that celebrates crimes.
That kind of sums it
I
up
mean,
right there.
wow. I mean, we see Mark Elias putting a finer point on it. This point about what we call it and how this case is framed, I think is absolutely critical. And I really think that what Lachlan Cartwright was saying in the last hour before we came to you all about making sure the American people understand what this is really about, that he will do anything. He, as in Donald Trump, will do anything to try to hold on to power. He did what he needed to do. He crimed and he lied about the crimes and covered up the crimes in 2015, 2016 because he wanted to be president. He lied and tried to bully the American people and lied and lied and lied and tried to subvert the election in 2020. And then when that didn't work, he helped instigate January 6th. And if people don't think that he will do the same thing this time, they are literally, they must have been living under a rock with headphones on.
So the destruction of norms is something we talk about a lot on this show, on my show, and on the other programs. And one of the biggest institutions and that's why I admire Mark Elias so much, is that the rule of law is something that has to be protected all of the time, because it's not a convenient truth for only certain administrations or for only certain people. And so when you don't have that protected, when you have Congress that's compromised, the Oval's compromised, SCOTUS is compromised, where is the safe space for justice to live and to breathe and to survive? And that is exactly what has happened. And I think what was smart, actually, about maybe starting it with the delineation of calling it the hush money, but making sure that you understood that it was election interference, is it made it relatable in so many different ways.
But can we just be honest with ourselves? It was the press that started calling it the hush money case, the media apparatus, and we can defend it all we would like, but that was wrong to do. It was wrong. The media apparatus sat around tables, not us, but other people sat around tables and were like, this is just a hush, this is about a porn star and a president. And that was not correct. And if it were up to the media apparatus, the jury probably wouldn't have understood it. So I thank God that the actual lawyers in the courtroom for DA Bragg knew what they were doing and put this in the correct frame. The DA never framed it that way. In the indictment, it never said hush money. So we was wrong.
Yeah, and I think that also, to both your points, and it sort of broadens it out a little bit more, because, Mark, you have now, a letter from Senate Republicans, 8 of them, vowing to oppose all non-defense spending, Biden nominees, and Democratic legislation. This really goes to what Katie was just talking about, that, where's the safe space for justice, right? So you create that safe space, but then you've got the political consequence by illiberal, unprincipled individuals like Mike Lee, J.D. Vance, Tommy Tuberville, Eric Schmidt, Marsha Blackburn, Rick Scott, Roger Marshall, and Marco Rubio, right? Who now want to penalize the justice system for doing what it was supposed to do, right? Which was to adjudicate the facts in front of it. And 12 peers of Donald Trump decided you're guilty. And now they want to haul Bragg in. Police, you got to tell us, all the fraud and all the lies that you made up to convict Donald Trump. How do we rectify this? I mean, because I don't know, I'm going to be straight up about it. I don't think a lot of Democrats in the political world appreciate the urgency of this moment. And are sort of piddling around with this idea that somehow stuff like this, using the system against the system, is not political fodder to go after.
Yeah, I think that one of the great tragedies of our time is how unseriously we take the threats that Donald Trump is to the political system and to democracy as a whole. I mean, the fact is, we now know he committed crimes to win his first election. We know that he incited a violent insurrection and crimes to try to overturn his second election. We are now 5 months from his third election, and what is it about his behavior that leads us to believe we won't see further criminal acts? And with respect to the Republican Party, there was not that long ago when we were told that the likes of Marco Rubio and Tim Scott represented the moderates in the Republican wing of the party. Well, Tim Scott has said he won't accept the outcome of the election. Marco Rubio has said that and now wants to say that that courts shouldn't operate. There is no moderate wing of the Republican Party. And I wish we would, the mainstream media, not you all, but when I see others in the media, I wish they would just acknowledge this. I understand they are looking for that unicorn, but they don't exist. When Donald Trump says that he won 6 elections in 2020 that he didn't, they are all going along with it. When he said recently that he won Minnesota, you didn't see any of them say he didn't, even though he lost by 7 percentage points. And by the way, and Michael Steele, you were party chair, so mark my words. He gave a rally in New York in which he said he believes he will win New York and he believes he will win New Jersey. By the time we get to Election Day, Donald Trump and the Republican Party will be saying he won all 50 states. You think it's crazy today, but I am here to tell you, people thought I was crazy in 2020.
I wanted to add something which now seems pretty small in response to what you said, which is these 8, I would call them the Gang of 8, but Gang of 8 is already taken. None of these people are the people who are negotiators and actually getting bipartisan legislation done. None of them were actually going to vote for things. So the fact that they're like real brave and real strong, getting together to write a strongly worded letter is pretty pathetic.
And I'll just leave that there because that's exactly right. It is pathetic.